Good morning, all. The Lee County Recovery Task Force meeting will begin. It's June 23rd. It's after 10 o'clock. If we could rise for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Happy Friday to everybody. Welcome. Thanks for coming once again. There's really not a lot that I have in introduction-wise, so I'll move right to the minutes. Understand that we received a revised copy of minutes.
I would make a motion to approve the
Microphone.
Mike, your mic.
I would move to approve the minutes from the April 28th meeting with the changes that I included.
A motion on the floor.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Thank you very much.
I would also move to accept the minutes from the May meeting as well, as written.
I second.
Thank you. I'm sorry. Thanks, Terry. All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Thank you. Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. I'm going to obviously hand this over to Tanya. She's going to introduce the next item. We obviously look forward to your conversation and any input you might have.
Hi, everybody. So we coordinated with Glenn Salyer and Jeannie Sutton in terms of providing a CDBG-DR update. They are on track with developing the action plan in record time and being able to turn it in within the 120-day time frame that HUD has outlined. So on Tuesday, they will be presenting to the board in a workshop outlining the vision and getting the input from the board in terms of the direction that they would like to see with the development of the action plan. That will be recorded, and we will send out the recording of that workshop to you all and your staff as you have identified, so that you have full visibility in terms of those discussions with regards to the CDBG-DR funding. They will have a comment period of August 1st through 31st as required through HUD, and having that public plan publicly available on the website and doing different events throughout the community to bring awareness of what's included in it and gaining input. HUD requires that whatever input is provided, it has substantial responses to it. So if any feedback is provided in written form to the county, they will need to incorporate it or respond to it in a substantial way in the development of that action plan. So with that, after that point, it will go back to the Board of County Commissioners for adoption, including that the public input as well, and submission to HUD for their review. HUD has to provide feedback or approval within 60 days of submission. So we're still on, the county is still on track in terms of that timeline that we had presented during all the town halls with regards to the CDBG-DR funds. HUD may come back with comments that require more back and forth. That's why implementation says TBD. So that will be very much at kind of HUD's discretion in terms of what happens after the submission from the county to HUD with the action plan. Any questions in terms of the timeline? All right, so we've been receiving a lot of questions in terms of the role of the CDBG-DR implementation and the task force. We worked with Glenn and Jeannie to develop the next two slides. That with the county as the recipient of the funding, they are responsible and have the liability of the implementation of the CDBG-DR program and the compliance and maintaining compliance with all the rules that come along with that funding. So they are within the action plan outlining the specific programs at the direction of the county board and including those items and how the funding will be then disseminated through what most likely will be competitive grant program or some other mechanism that the funding is distributed to subrecipients such as municipalities and other stakeholders, and then providing that technical assistance and ensuring the compliance of this funding. The slide deck will be available on the Resilient Lee website after this meeting and be emailed out to the Recovery Task Force members as well. With the Recovery Task Force, the Recovery and Resilience Plan, which is different than the action plan, the Recovery and Resilience Plan that we are all working together to develop, including the branch action plans, which is different than the county's action plan. We'll come up with better words next time, is a higher level planning effort of holistically looking, as Commissioner Ruane has been saying, the action plan is the $1.1 billion plan. Recovery and Resilience Plan is, I think, $7 billion and counting plan, in terms of the holistic need of the community, so that we may advocate for additional funding, pursue additional funding sources through the state appropriations, other federal programs, and potentially going forward and advocating for additional CDBGDR allocations from the federal government to increase that $1.1 billion. HUD was very upfront in saying that they did not have data on infrastructure when they calculated the allocation between the state of Florida, Lee County, Volusia County, Kentucky floods, California fires. They didn't have the infrastructure data and that unmet need from the community locally. So the projects that you submitted through the task force from each municipality and the additional information that was provided to Glenn and Jeannie is being included in the action plan to demonstrate to HUD, yes, you gave us $1.1 billion. This is how we are proposing that $1.1 billion needs to be utilized, but there is a larger need. In setting the stage for an additional CDBGDR allocation in the future for Lee County and the jurisdictions within it. So that is the vision for the Recovery Task Force and the branches and the work that we're all doing here together, is that larger planning effort and identifying all unmet needs so that it can be better communicated to federal, state partners for additional funding. One of the emergent needs in something that we'll be probably talking about in the next RTF meeting or the meeting after that is what does that strategy look like for advocating for and educating HUD on what is needed and congressional partners of what that full infrastructure unmet need is and what that additional allocation could look like. So that'll be something that we continue to discuss and how to advocate for additional funding from HUD, from CDBGDR, as well as other funding streams. Any questions on those items? Yes, Holly.
The only question I had was on the Resilient Lee site. It shows that there's $2.1 billion. Could you explain that? I think there's some confusion on that.
So that is looking at a wide variety of different grants that are coming in based off of the data that we have received on what funding has been allocated to the community. That will continue to be updated based off of the different funding sources that have been communicated, have been allocated to this area.
And will there be a breakdown of those so we can take a look at those as well?
Yes, we can
Okay.
provide that.
Thank you.
So we do have a workshop on Tuesday, the 27th. We're hoping to have, may not be this afternoon, but as early as Monday, just the details of that. I think it'll be really informative for everybody. It'll have the breakdown that Councilwoman was just referring to. It'll have some additional insight on where we are at this point in time. So we're trying to be as transparent as we can. I can assure you that the book that Glenn and Jeannie put together is about that thick. And I really appreciate everyone's input, but we're going to continue to obviously receive that. Last number I checked, we're about 7.9 billion and still growing on what our community has inputted for what they believe their needs are. So as soon as we're able to put that online, the Aurora agenda is just online at the moment. I'm hoping to get the details as soon as possible on there. It'll be a big file, so I suggest that you connect to Wi-Fi if you want to look at those documents.
Yeah, it's on the 27th.
Correct, 27th, 9:30. It's a workshop, so obviously there's not an opportunity for engagement, if you will. Our workshops by state statute, the BOCC before I got there basically indicated that we listen, but we don't have an engagement with the public. We don't have a public comment period. So if anyone feels when that plan is out, if there's anything that you see Monday, feel free to bring and send me any emails. I will certainly bring items. I have a variety of different things I'll bring up on Tuesday, so I'm happy to share your thoughts. I'll certainly give
Workshop going to be here,
June 27th.
the location.
Admin
Oh, I'm
East.
sorry, at the normal chambers at the BOCC, at 2120 Main Street.
We'll send you the address.
You said we'll get on Monday the entire booklet.
I'm hoping, honestly, Mayor, if we can somehow get it uploaded this afternoon, but no later than Monday, it'll be uploaded on the website. The schedule for the workshop is actually there. It's June 27th. I'm just, right now, if you click on it, there's no details other than just really the skeleton of what the workshop looks like.
And the workshop, obviously don't vote on that, but what do you,
Microphone, please.
what do you expect as a potential result of that meeting? You got $7 billion worth of projects, I guess, from what I'm hearing. How do you digest that, and what would be the likely outcome of that?
Great question. So I think really what we want to do is, as we disseminate that information, it's really an opportunity for us to absorb that. And we do have another opportunity before we do anything and go out and do the draft and go out on the road and explain it with everyone. So we'll continue to refine that. But I think right now, due to the nature of it, you're going to just look through that. I think if you compare what your municipalities put together to make sure we've not missed anything, if there's anything else that you might see from that, from other municipalities that triggers something in your head that says, oh, wow, I forgot that. That's a great idea. Again, there's opportunities to make adjustments. I'll take those comments, obviously, identify, I'll indicate that it came in from whatever representative from the task force. Our objective continues to make sure we define the need, and I need your participation to help make sure we capture the need as comprehensive as we can.
Not to overload you, could we go to, like our representative in our area is Ray Sandelli, we could bring our comments to him.
So you're more than welcome to do that. Again, I offered it to me because I've seen the plan. I've started to go through it. I also have Tanya and Terry that are there. By all means, you want to send them to Ray. I just want to make sure that, I don't know how I tell Ray to make sure he brings his comments to the meeting. I'm just trying to give everybody an indication
Okay.
to make sure your comments are heard. And I want to make sure that they're included. To me, it doesn't matter. I don't need to control them. Your representative is fine. I just want to make sure you may want to call that representative or just indicate if they can carry that to the workshop.
Okay. All right.
That's kind of what we're hoping to have an open dialogue. Both Glenn and Jeannie have done an awful lot of work. It's really the first time for the county commission to have an opportunity to discuss the contents and do just the size, the voluminous nature of what we've received. I don't know that anyone's going to be able to digest that whole document per se. We all have received a draft of the book itself in paper form, but the county is forever famous for continue to update. As many of you know, we update up and including the day of the meeting. So electronic versions are generally the more current version than what potentially is in paper. So we try to make sure we have that as things get added and removed from that. But I'm really looking for you all to look at those items. You know what you put in. Look at your cities to your north and south and see if there's anything that they submitted that you may have not thought of or your committee or your group may not have thought of.
You'll be disseminating this just to this group, and it'll be our responsibility.
I'll make sure that you have a separate email as
Okay,
soon as it's available.
but it'll go out to,
It'll go out to the task force,
okay,
obviously, so you all have it. I'm also just indicating the website for the county meeting as it gets updated. So if I get it this afternoon, I'll disseminate it. If there's any additions or any removal or deletions, I'm just indicating you want to look online because I'm not going to have the ability for multiple versions to continue to update you.
good, thank you.
No problem.
So one kind of 10,000 foot level question is, so we have $8,000 or $8 billion in identified need and $1.1 billion in funding. So when will the process happen to prioritize that? Is that going to happen in the VOCC workshop? Or
So not at the workshop initially. We'll go through a subsequent meeting and start prioritizing. I want this task force to have the opportunity to obviously have their weigh in on that as well. But Tuesday's meeting is really just for the first time to see a document that everybody's been waiting for, to see that. I think it's really unrealistic for us to be able to A, digest it, B, start to prioritize that. It is 9:30. I know there's a hard cap at 11:30. Senator Albritton is coming in for a transportation meeting with us all at 12:30. I know that's going to take up most of the day as we have different meetings and opportunities to talk to him about transportation issues. So 2 hours, I don't think I count on too much.
When is that commission meeting?
June 27th?
Oh, the commission meeting is that day.
June 27th is that meeting. And then, yeah, so that starts at 9:30. It is estimated to cut off at 11:30. The meeting for Senator Albritton for transportation that we asked them to come down specifically for Lee County as a whole is at 12:30. It's at the property appraiser's office. Actually, former representative and obviously tax appraiser Caldwell was the one that requested him to come on down. He's been very engaged in transportation and certainly in that regard. We anticipate that meeting. It's open to the public. We'll publicize that, the address, the details. That'll be from 12:30 to 2:30. And then we're going to do a tour around the various islands, including Sanibel, Fort Myers Beach, and Estero. Senator Albritton was here a couple days thereafter, after the storm. Just wanted to put eyes on this. There's a lot of different conversations we're having, but transportation seems to be the biggest issue where we have commonality. And obviously any opportunities where we have relief in the transportation where we're all going to benefit from. I know there's a lot of funding sources relative to the transportation silo, not just tolls or not just gas tax, but a number of items. So any type of relief, no different than the bridges that we received and the street signs, whatever we can do, it obviously helps the overall community. That's the genocide of why we're asked them to come on down. Yes, ma'am.
With the meeting on the 27th, again, it's just a workshop, so that you're just kind of giving consensus and direction. You're working in concert with the county. Everything's in collaboration, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, we should known earlier about it. So this is the first I've heard of it. So we'll have to, hopefully that plan can get out. It's going to be a lot of work to try to get through it, to give input that is really going to be needed. But as you indicated, this is just a first bite of the apple,
Mhm.
correct? And I think that's really important that we understand that.
And we've received a draft, but we've been asked by county staff to put it together, not to disseminate it yet because it's obviously not approved from staff. So I have a draft in a book form of it. So I wish I had known. I should have brought it here. This workshop has been advertised that we're having this workshop for this purpose. It's really the first step. I don't want to set the bar too high for expectations just because some of the county commissioners just received their booklet. They've not had the same engagement that you all have had and or that I've had with both Tanya and Terry, obviously keeping me up to date on the briefings and things of that nature. I think if I could have a takeaway from that meeting on Tuesday, I'd like to make sure that you have an opportunity to see this. I'd like you to look at this and see if there's anything that you perhaps may have overlooked. Perhaps you may want to, oh, wow, I didn't think of that or this. The best thing we do is when we work together as a whole, we collaborate and we obviously help each other with things that we want to for our community. They may be specific in nature to your community, but I'm going to suspect there'll be things that you might say, I didn't think of that. That's what I'm hoping to achieve by your input. Again, we're going to continue to build off that. That's why it's a draft. As I said from day one, I'd like to see us be around the $10 billion range. So we're open to continue to have more projects. And I really can't begin to prioritize them because I think the issue will be, the unmet need, as the assistant secretary was down the beach when many of you were there, was really there quick from really a census that was done and their online review of what damage we potentially had, and they came up with a number. They look forward to us obviously identifying what we believe our unmet need is And that's where the situation is. Tanya and I and Terry have had a lot of conversations about other communities, other situations where that money's been increased dramatically. That's our overall goal. So then the prioritization is going to be easier, obviously, as the pot grows. Right now, the goal has always been 70% for housing. It's certainly a little bit of a challenge currently to get to 70% for housing based on what we believe is capturing the AMI areas. And again, we're looking for input from you all. So I think we'll get there, but right now, some of the preliminaries, we're in the mid-60s on what housing looks like. And again, it's a draft.
And I would, a couple of the branch meetings I attended, it did seem like the LMI is a pretty big factor, a pretty big priority. But the advantage of the housing projects is the way you administer those makes them qualify.
Right.
So they could be essentially anywhere.
Yeah. This is unprecedented, obviously, for Havoc County to receive this and have the liability associated with this, because we not only are the recipient, but we share the responsibility. FEMA has been known historically to have clawbacks. The clawback would come back to the county. So it's a good thing, and it certainly has its challenges.
Just to, oh, sorry, go ahead, sir.
Did you say this will be live streamed or we'll get it recorded?
It'll be
after
live
that?
streamed.
It is live
Every BOCC workshop and/or any meeting are always live streamed and they're all taped. You can always find them on YouTube as well. Thereafter, if you didn't have an opportunity, we post them up within that day on YouTube as well.
Yeah, I think I'll get our staff to look at that, those that are involved, so they get firsthand information. Hearing it is one thing, and
And if
reading
everybody
about it is
wants,
another one.
if everybody wants after the meeting, I'll make sure that we disseminate that YouTube version for y'all. If that's something y'all want, I have no problem making sure staff does that for y'all. So you have quick access to it. You don't have to search through YouTube or our website. Why don't I just do that? I think that might be easier for everybody. We'll do that. We'll disseminate after the workshop's over, so you have an indication of where we are. But it's really round one, and I don't want to set unrealistic expectations considering we just received the draft, and I'm about midway through the first read, so it's a lot to digest.
Just-
Yes, ma'am.
Just a final note on that. So this is specifically for the CDBG grant,
Correct.
which is because when I read this, I just want to make sure there's not any confusion in regards to, what we are doing as a group is my understanding is writing a plan similar to Bay County's, which I've been reading extensively now that we've been looking at what's coming through. So this is separate from that, just to clarify. Our
Yes.
task is different. Those dollars generated through the county down to however it's going to be feasibly generated over the next few years. Is that a correct?
That's exactly perfectly
Okay.
worded.
So,
All right.
so
Thank you.
maybe as Councilwoman Smith had indicated, Bay County came up with a plan, and day two, they gave us a copy of that plan in writing. Ultimately, that's what our plan will be December 5th when we submit that. That'll be inclusive of not only, it'll be the roadmap on how you basically come out of this, what we learned from it, what things we not only ask for from funding, what resiliency measures. It'll cover an awful lot of topics. So again, the whole idea of the Bay County process as opposed to what was on the shelf for the BOCC was to have more public engagement like we're having right now. The BOCC disaster recovery plan that was on the shelf didn't have nearly the engagement. It was a very high level version. I just preferred to go in the direction like Bay County. Tanya obviously has a lot of experience with that. So does Terry from other communities. I just think that is a much more detailed roadmap. So that's ultimately what we'll get to when Councilman Smith talks about Bay County's plan. That's what we hope to get to December 5th. It'll include CBGR, but every other grant, every other opportunity, every branch, any type of funding, however we came through this as we continue to. And that continues to, you'll track appropriations as they go on in subsequent years. Because not only did they give me that plan, but then they gave me the appropriations that have taken place since then, including this last session.
That's good. All right.
Thank you.
Member Terry.
Great. This was a great conversation, so you're understanding how all of the elements fit together.
we did have the great benefit of a starting point with the Bay County plan, and we've been able to then build on that, learn from their experience, and make improvements on how we've moved forward. One of those is the very extensive public engagement. If you recall, we had a round of 17 town hall meetings. We've had over 5,000 responses to the surveys. We've coupled that with the on the table and the 1,000 responses there. So we've got a lot of public input, some of which are generating ideas that are collected in what we're calling an initiative bank. And that'll be a very important resource to help to identify and validate the priorities going forward. So a next phase of this was the workshops, where now we engage with subject matter experts to do deeper dives after we have mapped out what is the landscape of the issues that we're going. And there were 4 thematic areas that we organized around: supporting business and workforce, the attainable and resilient housing, community resilience, and critical infrastructure. There's a series of 14 workshops. We had 14 national experts for that, and a tremendous participation by county and city officials, and we appreciate. Please send your thanks to your team. So the workshops were set up in a format where it was really designed to be a conversation between the experts and branch members. They spanned the branches, so we had a range of branch member participants here. This picture and then the next one, just to give you a sense of what the room looked like during these conversations. And so to do a high-level view of what is emerging here, and again, there's documentation that underpins this. The critical infrastructure workshop, here we're looking at the need for vulnerability assessments, updating design standards for public facilities, the parks and built environment. Recognition that for a lot of the resilience work that we need more community buy-in. This isn't something that just government does and is responsible for, but we all play a role in this. And so an important initiative is that education and continued outreach to the public. And then attention to the flood mitigation plans that many are substantially in place. Lessons learned from the prior hurricanes and storm events. So now making sure that we understand what is required to either keep those maintained or to strengthen and harden the existing flood mitigation plans. For transportation, identifying a series of things from the Cape Coral multimodal transit plan, the Alico Road extension, and so on, coupled with mixed-use land planning, hardening our signal systems, the notion of how light rail could help to alleviate some of the transportation congestion around here, improving evacuation with access to the shelters themselves. For water, which was one of the systems hardest hit during this process, some have adopted already a 210 mile per hour standard for designs. Additional input into and support for the septic to sewer conversions, many of which are underway. Identifying the need for separate direct lines to critical infrastructure facilities such as the hospitals, fire departments, other things. And so this is, I think, an important highlight here of that redundant line that is needed so that when part of a system goes down, there is the backup. Pre-staging of resources, the types of generators, equipment, materials that are needed, now understanding where the points of failure were in the systems and being prepared with replacement parts. pre-approved contracts with various vendors and suppliers, creating interconnects and redundancies across the various utility providers, isolating control valves, overall hardening. The notion of looking at how trees are planted near utility lines, it was the uprooting of trees that was responsible for some of the damage for that, and then how to help the utilities also seek grant funding and resources for their work. For power, there was a tremendous conversation with the power providers here, both electric and gas, for that, and understanding one of their critical needs will be to create the redundancy, the loops, instead of the radial distribution systems. Advances in battery storage have gone a long way to be able to create new alternatives instead of generators for things like lift stations. The traffic signals is very interesting because there's just no way to pull those up out of flood zones and do things basic like maintenance of them and all that if they're 16 feet in the air. So I think we all learned a lot about the realities of our infrastructure and operating. There is an interest in our providers of moving to large scale solar as another backup. But again, when the sun is not shining, we have to have the backup system. So that was the first workshop, set of workshops. The next.
Just a quick question there,
Yes,
Terry.
please.
So something like infrastructure, which is by its nature, it spans large geographical areas. How do you peg an LMI component for that?
So with that, what the intention of the workshops was, we did the town halls and bringing that community input from in terms of what our priorities and what you did all the last month of confirming these are the priority areas and initiative that we will now be building initiatives off of and focusing on within the branch action plans and the recovery resilience and recovery plan. So with that, the workshops were bringing subject matter experts that kind of could speak to and answer questions from the branch members of, okay, we're thinking about this. What is the ways that this can be done? What has been done in the past that worked or did not work, and bringing those pieces together. And we'll talk about a little bit on how the initiatives are being built. But to your specific question of how we break things up, so say we were talking about water infrastructure. If there is a significant portion of water infrastructure that needs to be made more resilient, you can pick and piece and phase projects and break it up to have different grant programs funded based off of those phases. We did that a lot. We're doing that a lot in the Panhandle right now. Phase one is not an LMI, so that maybe is a state revolving fund project that is being funded out of that loan program. And then the LMI area, apply for and secure a CDBGDR grant or some other kind of funding stream for that piece. So it'd be working with the subject matter experts, municipalities, with the different jurisdictions to identify, all right, what is the holistic need and how do we chunk it and phase the project so that it is actually feasible. And that would be the process that we're going through now. Is like, all right, we have this pie in the sky. What do we envision? What are those feasible steps and how do we chunk it and phase it so that it is actually something that can be implemented? The answer, Ish?
So I'm guessing that, let me just try to, just so I understand. So you're saying, like, let's say you're doing a sewage treatment thing. So if you were in an LMI area neighborhood and you were doing a septic to sewer conversion, that would qualify. But then if you're building a central or hardening a sewer treatment plant, then that would be under a different grant because it's not quantifiable or significant about how much serves the LMI?
It depends on the specifics of the project. And because those are very large dollar amounts for each project, they'd probably be going into different phases of the implementation. If it's septic to sewer, clearly an LMI, it may be eligible and move forward on with the CDBGDR application. With the septic to sewer, or not the wastewater treatment facility, depending on how big the project is, there may be phases in there of chunking it and finding different funding streams for it. But if it is benefiting a LMI area in the way that it's being serviced, that it provides services, it may be eligible under CDBG-DR as well.
Thank you.
Just to add in a couple of things with that, and just as we go through this, we've not only found that many grants, you have the ability to coat or bundle them, if you will. So on Department of Agriculture, we've sat in some of their federal meetings for what septic sewer money may be. So, you also have hazard mitigation money. So as we come across the opportunities where we can bundle the pieces to try to get to that solution, we'll certainly do that. Anytime we have a distinct federal funding source that allows us to cover that specific item, we want to preserve, obviously, this block grant for exactly what it's for. So this is just really complex because there are 26 different federal agencies that we ultimately have an opportunity to certainly tap. I've just come across sewer to septic. It's just an area. I've been on many webinars with the Department of Agriculture in Washington, and they just have an awful lot of, and they do 75% funding, and they don't have any limitations where you perhaps use a 25% match from the state and take it that way, as opposed to coming up with your own local match. So there's a lot of ways to navigate through these funding sources to ultimately achieve the best outcome for our community. Those would be the challenges.
Okay, so the next one, I won't go through these as well. The diverse workforce is making sure that we could reach out so that all of the residents here are able to participate in the workforce and to accommodate the growing needs of our region. So it was more broadly than just education attainment, but also the issues of housing, transportation, childcare barriers that we face. Looking at the pipelines all the way from cradle to career, essentially the issue of mental health came up here. For arts and culture specifically, looking at how arts organizations are positioned in our communities, the role they play. There's a need for capital improvements for those, and connecting also with residential for housing and studio space for artists. And then the growth sectors identified, there's a large apparel manufacturing here, also the medical and marine, fintech, high tech with coding, security, understanding that airport capacity can become a bottleneck. And fortunately, the airport is forward looking in this. And then ideas like employer assisted housing and how to connect with employment centers with housing. The third area on community resilience focused a lot on the pre-disaster planning as well as then the follow-up after disasters. We heard loud and clear about trying to avoid schools and libraries as the shelters because they need to return to normal operations as we recover from these. The opportunities to consider things like the 15 United Way houses, the important roles of the county sustainability office and communications, particularly for vulnerable communities. Arts and culture came up again here in terms of looking at their organizational capacity. They are asked to step in and provide support and resources post-disaster, but there's not a dedicated stream of funding that they could count on to help them to absorb the financial costs and expenses there. They have their own issues of hardening their facilities to protect either art or historic collections. And then for health, very significant area here, the issue of addressing the stigma of mental health treatment, vulnerable populations, for this, the home care telehealth, and the mobile crisis, and needing the interagency support for that. And then the fourth area on housing, here's a good example, Councilman Veach, about how do we we blend different streams of funding with the Live Local Act, or it should say Act, not Art, and the Florida Housing Financial Corporation. How do we help to remove barriers and lower the costs for housing, tax credits, incentives for land and transit corridors, and then for land use policy issues? This will be an ongoing issue about our building codes, zoning codes, the ideas of accessory dwelling units, and beginning with some data and mapping on these communities. The permitting is how to automate this, how to create inter-county municipal agreements for similar systems and software. For that, the need for increasing staffing, regional or universal application processes. So these were a summary of the topics. There are literally hundreds of ideas that are maintained in a initiative bank to support this. Before we go further, though, just your reflections in terms of, were these the types of ideas that you were expecting? Is there anything that surprised you? Is there an area that was missing? So your reaction to this brief summary.
Yeah, I think it was a great overall view. When I look at natural resources, or when I look at water, one thing that I think that we might not have talked about or put up for consideration is reuse water, purple pipes. I know, Cape Coral has been doing it for, I think when I first moved on there, 30 something years of that reuse, since water is going to be the most precious commodity that we have. So much of our potable water is being used in our lawns, in our areas, all through our communities. So I think that's going to be essential as we move forward on that. Also, when we look at our natural resources, just making sure that we prioritize reducing nutrient pollution in our waterways as well. Here we go. I think that's going to be extremely important, as well as when we're looking at density and height, making sure that we have green area between that urban sprawl that we know is going to happen in Lee County. But how do we protect those buffers between development that I know that Lee County will be watching? So, but I think the water aspect is one that we really are going to have to focus on countywide. As we have more and more people coming to the county, their needs are going to be greater, and the resource is finite.
It's a great catch, a good example of what, as you look at the big picture and what you see, these are things we've been focusing on. We don't see it here. We want to make sure we capture all that. Other thoughts? Okay. So the good news is there's still time for you and your staffs to digest it. It does dovetail nicely with the BOCC's workshop next week. We continue to gather these data for these initiatives and ideas. And we'll get into shortly what happens next with these.
Terry, maybe a suggestion is, okay, so those are topics right now, it covers 4. Maybe everyone look at those. If it's not, maybe go again to the next slide so people can see the next group of topics. If there's any issues that are on there as you try to digest, I know we all read quickly, but if there's anything that jumps out, great comment before, but just want to make sure, give everybody an opportunity to look at this one more time in each page by itself.
Well, I'll just say, there's so many worthy projects and items you're coming up with. I mean, certainly I from outside of my jurisdiction, from a county standpoint, coming up with growth sectors so we're not so dependent on construction and tourism. So we have some diversity. So to build that up is pretty strong. I also think that I noticed there was a mention about multi-use paths. And I know in the county there are lots of right-of-ways along canals and power lines that could be used as an off-road multi-use path. It's done in other jurisdictions. I know in Colorado it's a big thing that could be done fairly inexpensively, and maybe in an emergency be used for evacuation routes.
To your comment, Councilman. We've run into some significant costs for right-of-ways. Right-of-ways are becoming extremely expensive these days. There was a lot of anxiety up in the Mount Lachey area because there was money put in for a roundabout at Stringfellow, which is not going to happen for two reasons. One, we didn't get nearly the funding. The community doesn't want it. But when we went to go to the right-of-way, we were amazed at the cost. The cost of the right-of-way was almost what the cost of the construction of the actual roundabout was. So I just want to caution everybody that right-of-ways are becoming extremely expensive, no different than any other, especially when you now are a county or you're an area where you need that right-of-way, and we have to advertise, we should do everything in the sunshine. So I need that right-of-way, and all of a sudden we're doing this project. It's amazing. The cost of that right-of-way has gone up exponentially. I mean, the one thing I've said all along is right-of-ways have been grossly underestimated on their cost, and I want to use them. I mean, again, I lived in Sanibel for a long time. I love our shared use paths, but just trying to caution everybody, we want to go there. It's just that the costs are sometimes, when we come across them, equal to the actual project itself for acquisition right away.
And I do appreciate that. I know that my experience in Colorado was that they have these multi-use paths along existing right-of-ways. So they're along rivers and power lines. And it was started by an engineering student who did it as a project, like a master's project. And now they're all over the place. So they managed to find places where they already have right-of-ways. And I understand it's complicated because some of these right-of-ways, if they're along a canal, they're very restricted, but other times they're not.
Yeah, the other thing that's really interesting as you go around, we've been doing surveys for different states. There's more states that do not have sunshine laws than do. So it's a lot easier if I don't have to telegraph what we're doing. Because once I telegraph it, again, we're trying to obviously comply with our law, which we all do, we all operate in. It becomes really challenging because those prices change exponentially. So the states that, and you're referring to Colorado being one that, I don't know exactly what time frame you were, but they have not been subject to sunshine. So it makes things a lot easier to try to do that. You know what you're doing. You don't have to announce it. You do the acquisition, and then obviously you do the project. We announce we want to do this project. By the way, we need it right away. That's just an issue. I'm just amazed at the number of states that do not have, and I'm not advocating for suppressing sunshine, but I see the states that seem to have less challenges. And our own legislators that we deal with, they walk across the room, they build their consensus, they do whatever they need to do. I became very grossly aware of that when I was on a task force at the federal level, and you literally have the conversation you need to, and you don't need to have them here. It just seems restrictive in some ways, and certainly right now in this economic boom that we're going through and everybody wanting to be in Lee County, I am just astonished at the requirements for purchasing right-of-ways.
Yeah, I think that also goes with land because, we're in an opportunity on Fort Myers Beach where there's land available because of the storm. A lot of things become vacant. A lot of people are moving, but then the price of that land is high. And as soon as the government expresses any kind of interest, it seems to appreciate because of it.
And we have to do things within fair market value, many things, whether it's 2020, whatever. We need to look at appraisals. We're restricted, obviously, to work within the appraised value of that. So when someone asks me for a price 3 times what the appraised value, I don't have the flexibility within the public sector to go and move forward with that, despite whatever the community might need.
With the focus on affordable housing and the construction of affordable housing going to go over a long period of time, do you see the opportunity for the state legislature to revisit, how they're handling the Sadowski Fund, which was a trust fund that was established back 30 years ago to provide funds for affordable housing, but that money has been channeled into what I would call the general fund of the state for many, many years. Is there some indication the state, being as economically successful as it is, might be willing to take another look at that Sadowski Fund in terms of providing funds for affordable housing?
I don't have any clarity that subject's really been out and about and spoken about at all.
Okay, that touches on this, and then the last one. Oh, okay, that was good.
Thank you, Robbie.
Okay, very, very good. back to you, Commissioner, and we'll talk about the near well.
So we've been collecting information. We've been building the initiative matrices of essentially how we're looking to go forward, but looking for your feedback. Is collected all the information of what the prior years, what are the different ideas from the community, from the workshops, from you all as you've expressed here, and all the sources. And now we're funneling that towards what are the actionable solutions that the branches want to champion. So this month, they have been going through those workshops, starting to identify those initiatives. Next month and in August, we're putting meat to the bone of identifying specifically these are the projects, utilizing the projects that you have all submitted, as well as putting it into the context of a larger initiative to then include in the branch action plans. We are going to go through that process and present those initiatives to you all over the next couple of months. And then in September, early September, late August, after you've all had a chance to weigh in, provide edits in a couple different occasions, going back out to the community and saying, you all spoke, this is what we heard, did we get it right? And having another opportunity for the community to provide input on those initiatives that have been identified. Are going to be included within the branch action plans and the overall plan. Yes, sir.
As you go through all that work, are your group, Haggerty, going to help us put those up and identify the big baskets that we have in there?
Yeah.
And before any decisions are made, we all get a chance here in this task force to take a look at that.
Yes. So the next couple we'll be going through is the initiative design phase. So we're taking the ideas and individual projects. Some of them are going to be grouped into an initiative. And then, so we receive projects of individual, for example, underground water infrastructure or stormwater infrastructure projects, like specifically these 3 blocks, or in general, this area, what needs to be done. That's going to be grouped into a larger initiative of looking at water infrastructure and what can be done there. So projects will be grouped, creating the larger initiative and putting that meat to it, including what is the needs that need to be addressed, what is the description of the initiative in the individual projects that will make up the implementation of that initiative, what does success look like, and that timeline or proposed timeline of how it can be implemented, and overall what budget-wise is this, knowing that cost of things are changing dramatically very quickly with wood, with concrete and things along those lines. But what is the round figure that we're looking for, and what are the different funding sources that can be utilized to make it a reality? To Councilman Beach's point of, all right, here's the larger initiative. This is how we can chunk it and put these pieces together and to make this initiative a reality over time. It is not a next year. This is going to be over a number of years that the implementation will cover. But that is the goal, is to develop these initiatives. And within the plan will ultimately look like this, of having these different elements of, this is a larger initiative. What is the description of it? Potential funding sources. What are the resources that are going to be needed? Meaning that there may be staff time needed to put some of these grant applications together, or to engage the private sector for potential investment opportunities. So what are the total resources in addition to funding that will be needed? We'll be identifying who are the partners that could work together to make this a reality, including those jurisdictions represented here at the table, as well as within the branches and other stakeholders within the community that could roll up their sleeves and be part of the effort overall. Yes, sir.
Tanya, I'm sorry to interrupt, but in this July-August timeframe, we've got a lot of projects. You're not eliminating at this point. Because what we talked about earlier was, let's get the number up as high as we can. See if we can get some additional funding. Hopefully we do, but if we don't, then the hard work will be starting the elimination. But at this phase of July, August, I don't know, September, we're trying to build the mass up for dollar requests.
Yes.
Okay, good.
So
So we talked about, we can add more, we see this list now. oops, we forgot something, we can still have a short period of time to come back in the appropriate area.
We request if there's anything else that you'd like to add, that you submit it as quickly as possible, because we have branch meetings happening in July where we're starting to put that meat to the bone. So if there is a little bit of seasoning that you'd like to add to the recipe, we'd love that as quickly as possible so we can incorporate it. But there's a lot of work that's going to be happening within the branches over the next 2 months of defining it, looking at best practices across the country, making sure that it's feasible here, that this is not was what worked over here, in a different jurisdiction, a different state, that will this work here? Is this feasible in Lee County? Does this work for what Lee County envisions for themselves? And where we take the best practices and the knowledge of the subject matter experts within the community to identify what is feasible, doable, and desirable by the local community. So there may be some concepts that were in those workshops that are not going to be feasible here for whichever reason. And that will be part of the process that we go over the next couple months in multiple discussions within the branches, with each of you all individually, with your staff, and making sure, is this something that we all want to champion and see for the community as a whole? Yes, sir.
I might be jumping ahead of this with my head, but let's say that the community decides this is really important. We're going to do this, whatever it's going to be. And then the RFPs come back, and all of a sudden it's 10 times more expensive than what the funds that we've kind of allocated. Take me through that. What does that look like?
Actually, something we're facing in the Panhandle right now. With that, if a project that is identified ends up being, I'll use one very specifically in the Panhandle, where pre-COVID, when the project was identified, it was 20 million. Post-COVID, it's 42. So with that, and identifying the stakeholders within it is then bringing those people back together and identifying what are other funding streams. So for the project that I'm specifically thinking, it's just a water project. We're going back to DEO and saying we need more funding. We're going to the state appropriations that this 20 million investment has been needed due to COVID, due to X, Y, and Z. Additional funding is, but within the write-up within it is identifying the partners that are working together to bring it to a reality.
I have a question. Could you go back to the schedule that you had put up? When you look at the schedule, like a few of my other colleagues mentioned, July, August, September, that's really when we're putting the meat to the bone there, as you said. My question is, and I know we've talked about it before, will this particular committee be meeting more during those months so we can have that dialogue that we need? Kind of how I see this process is the branches will be making recommendations, and those recommendations come to this board, and ultimately we will decide collectively what those priorities are, how we prioritize each one of those items. So I would just want to make sure that I'm understanding the process correctly, number one. And number two, how we will approach that moving forward as a task force.
Mayor, great point. I mean, at the last meeting, if you recall, I had indicated that I think we're going to get to a time frame we're going to have to, and we may need to require some nimbleness of this committee because we all work in situations where we have to call special meetings. I envision we're going to get to crunch time. I envision that we're going to probably need another meeting. That was something I was anticipating as this really starts to come together. I want to make sure that we have this input. And again, we'll try to give you as much heads up as possible, but I do believe you've identified something that I brought to everyone's attention last month. I don't see how we're not going to have that situation occur. And that might be not only just for this task force, but branches. It becomes a challenge as the timeframes start to come. And the other challenge you have is in August, we have to go out to the community, give public engagement. So the calendar becomes really challenging because I'm using a lot of the same people to do multiple things. So I may not have, I'm going to ask for forgiveness now. I may not give you as much heads up where we have a week and, this is where we need to stick the meeting in. I just see that as a crash course happening.
Yeah, I think it's inevitable. You know, when you look at it, we have a lot of data here that we're going to go through, and I know we have a lot of people and a lot of professionals going through that data. But I think at the end of the day, it's up to us as a task force exactly how this plan is going to end up. So I just want to make sure we have the ample time to have input. And there's no doubt that that's going to mean each one of us are going to probably have to step up to the plate and be more available here in the next several months. So thank you.
And with the different branches, some of them are a little further than others and have already identified these are very specific initiatives that we would like to champion. So those branches or those initiatives that have been identified, we're hoping to present those and have those presentations for you all in July. So we can chunk this July, August, and most likely an additional meeting in that August, September-ish timeframe, so that in September you can look at the holistic branch action plans, all the initiatives on it as a larger pie, but you've already had a chance to look at the individual initiatives before you get the whole picture to provide input.
Yeah, and based on what you had just observed is we could go ahead and work on calendars and kind of create some tentative meeting holds so that there's less chaos in your individual scheduling. And if we don't need them, fine, but I think as our chair indicates, we most likely will because of the massive amount of content that you'll be reviewing.
To go one step further, what I hope to achieve is to have a 90-day calendar to give us an indication what the outline may look like with some of our public meetings. So we start to block dates out to give us an indication. The calendar is going to get real tight quick. If you just look at what we need to accomplish as a group, we have some real hard deadlines that we have to have and meet. We are certainly going to do everything we can to have as many public meetings in the month of August. So same type of town hall environment. So it's going to be a really fluid situation. Again, I'll apologize to everyone in this room in advance, but I suspect that we'll start to fill that calendar in. As Terry said, I like the idea of putting some holes. But if just because I think it's a hold, if we have a hold and a hold, I can't guarantee that this hold has to be, it's just going to work the way the calendar will. We're just going to give you some type of indication, but I'd like to see a 90-day calendar going from this point forward to try to give you a timeline of how this rolls out all the way to our submission. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I wanted to thank you. You had sent out the initiatives from each of the workshops. And then the branch initiatives. And that was really helpful to try to go through those before today. I would ask if it's possible, if we could even get the slide packet a couple days before, because I think then we have an opportunity to actually engage rather than not be prepared as we're reading it for the first time. But I will tell you, the emails that you sent out, that was really helpful for me to be prepared. And then what I found that I'm doing that's working is getting in touch with someone. We all know people on the branches. So I'm making sure I get in touch with someone, reading the initiatives and saying, is this what you're taking back? To see if there are any other items that they said, no, this was a priority, which is why I brought up a couple of those today. So it's kind of trying to subgroup it before we get there as we start to gauge up because, like you said, Mayor Gunter, we're going to be gauging up ramping up quite a bit to get prepared. And then also it'll be very helpful. Again, I'm still a little confused with the two plans, the BOCC plan. Certainly we want to participate in that, understand it as well. So we can give good input, but it's the first bite of the apple. So we'll get that. And then hopefully in a timely manner, be able to provide impact and get impact from our branch leaders as well.
We will certainly strongly encourage the participants that are involved in the drafting of the information that gets disseminated to do their review as quickly as possible. As this group has gotten to be rather large that looks at this package, unfortunately, I don't have the luxury of sending it out until all bodies look at it. And again, when you're a bigger organization, you don't nearly move as nimble as when I was certainly in Sanibel. Our organization is just a lot bigger. And we're relying on a lot of experts, not only that are sitting here, but then experts that the branches have come in, the different questions. It's been a challenge, and I think they've done everything. But we'll do the best we can to try to get it to you, a day or two before the meeting. But I can't promise much earlier than that. It's just too difficult. to go through the reviews when you really want to have the comprehensive package from the branches, because the branches are still having meetings and we're trying to culminate that, trying to make sure we get it out. And it's difficult because no different than today in minutes, there's always corrections, additions, and deletions. So to disseminate that information accurately has been a challenge. And I'm not trying to make an excuse. I'm just giving you the reality of the size of this committee, the size of the various people that are involved. It just is a challenge, but great point, and we'll do the best we can to get it out. Maybe we get it out a day earlier than we have, but it's been a challenge to push it out. I have a lot of anxiety when we don't give information, and I'm not even working with the most current data either. So it does become a challenge to prep. I got it. I understand it. We'll try to improve upon that.
For example, we received this SBA data about an hour before this meeting. Jason and Shanna were like, you got it? But we will potentially maybe send a draft version of the PowerPoint of what information we do have at that time. So for example, the power workshop had to be rescheduled due to very critical stakeholders not being available during the week that we were met. They met this week. So we can potentially
How was this yesterday?
Tuesday or Wednesday. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Day before yesterday.
Yeah, so, I knew it seemed like we yesterday, but okay.
Yep. All right.
Thanks.
So what is going to be helping the branches, and we've been working with them to identify areas that they have like technical briefs where they would like to have access to additional subject matter expert information. And we're bringing in different SMEs, subject matter experts that are very familiar with insurance and how that has worked in post-disaster communities and other jurisdictions and what can be done. Bringing in subject matter experts that are involved in underground water infrastructure and again, post-disaster, what can be done and best practices. So branches have been identifying what are some areas that after the workshops, they would like more information and that will be documented and available to the branch members and you all to provide some best practices, what has been done elsewhere, and what are some standards to inform the initiative development. Ultimately, the goal is have everything be included and then put into the branch action plan for your review, edits, and then eventual approval to be included in the final recovery and resilience plan.
To spend a little more time on this, think about the initiative is the container, the name of the container we're using to aggregate like items together. That can be project ideas and put all those together. You see that we have 4 primary sources of input into this, beginning with the Recovery Task Force. Yourselves have identified a number of issues. The branches and their work, the workshops, and the town halls. All of these are being documented and collected for that. They form, if you think about a giant spreadsheet with 8 columns for all the branches, and then all the ideas are the rows coming across, we know that there's overlap. So these ideas connect to multiple branches. We want to make sure that we are creating a coherent, holistic vision for how these pieces fit together so that we're able to tap the synergies and reduce the duplication or the tensions and conflicts between competing ideas. And you'll have eyes on that entirety as we're moving forward. Our job is to organize it in a way that you can access it, understand it, and make decisions off of that. So in July, then, with all of this information, with additional help from subject matter experts, the branches now are going to be focusing on cataloging and beginning to create priorities of initiatives that are essentially shovel ready. There's a champion for that. There's likelihood of funding. There's clarity about what the work is that has to be done and who has to do that. What are the policy implications for those? So they're pretty well thought out by the time they would come back to you. so that we're not wasting your time with, pie in the sky ideas that, yeah, they may be great, but there's not enough substance and grounding for you to do much with it for either your direct jurisdiction or collectively for the county. These will be bolstered by the technical briefs that were just mentioned for that. And then what we want to, an important step for us is to meet with each of you and key members of your team over July, basically to identify a kind of a first look at these ideas and say, are there just some non-starters that simply will not work because of the realities of your jurisdiction and understanding of your constituents or whatever. We want to eliminate those early on in the process if they're just non-starters. Those that line up really well, kind of think of it as a green light, yellow light, red light, as we want to get that sense as we are evaluating these to move forward to create the finalized list that then will be the substance of the branch action plans. Those are where I think this body will take the most time in your deliberations, is being able to go branch by branch by branch, deep dive, asking the very difficult, thoughtful questions to move forward. And then when you're satisfied and we take these 8 component parts of the branch action plans to formulate the overall recovery and resilience plan. Questions about that overall flow and structure?
It looks like with the timing that you've got on this, it's going to be difficult to understand the full capital that's available to implement at a future date with the kind of process that we've got right now. So do we eliminate during this process to the 1.1 billion?
No. Let's set aside that 1.1 billion number, because that's just one particular element. I think we need to think more expansive, because even part of this exercise is framing a subsequent request back to HUD where there's a shortfall in the dollars that could be available. HUD just did not have sufficient information to be able to gauge theirs, right? If we use back to Bay County as an example, they have 322 items on their plan. Not all of them were funded at day one, but they kept them all on because it provides forward-looking guidance for then the identification of new sources of funding for that. So ideally, we come out with, this is the comprehensive package that Lee County collectively requires to rebuild and be more resilient. And that's the kind of the honest truth of, this is what it will take, whatever that dollar amount is. And then that gives the basis for each of you with your constituents to make the case for where local dollars matter. It gives the county the case for its priorities, it makes the case to the state and to the federal government, the 26 agencies that have dollars that could pertain to that. But we are looking at creating that holistic picture.
So I think, when you think about, we've talked about creating said list. The legislature has asked us for a said list. Again, we don't know until we ask. This round of appropriations was a surprise in many areas to the positive, paying for bridges, stoplights, street signs. As we go through this process, it's not just limited to the 1.1 billion. It's really the opportunity to say, here's our project list, and what silo, what branch, what funding opportunity is available to us, and how do we achieve this? Again, we all have to come back together. Each part of, and everyone in this, provides a service this community needs. So we just are trying to work collectively so we have a universal group, because each part of you and every city and every entity that's here plays a significant role. We're just trying to streamline the opportunities to make sure we go out and seek the funding that's necessary Again, Tallahassee did a wonderful job, and I can't thank chairperson and everyone that they did for us, because I never envisioned, any funding that we got. But putting that aside, I don't want us just to say it's 1.1 billion we're working on. Okay, it is a number that is we don't know at the moment, and it's just not limited to block grant. It's just what are our needs and how do we actually, obviously get the avocation, as we can, and then the funding sources are there. Again, having the Bay County plan gave me an opportunity to understand the different opportunities. The state's one easy way, quite frankly. It's not so many different departments that you go through for funding. The state was easy. They made it extremely easy for us to have resiliency in the House and Senate. So, and they picked up things that they were able to pick up. But our list will be comprehensive, and I suspect, like Terry had indicated, that's why forward thinking they asked for a 5-year plan from us. I look at this project list as here's our list. How can you help, and just find out as we cross things off what's remaining. That's a simple way to explain that.
Okay. To help to weave these elements together so they're not individual standalone projects, this body and others have identified the need for these overlays, and given the theme of resilience, that's the standard that Chair Ruane has set forth for the work of this group. Have an example here of the types of overlays that we're looking at. Next slide, please. Here's a case from the city of Norfolk, Virginia, which is also a very environmentally sensitive area, and it has tremendous strategic value to our nation there. But here are the sorts of overlays that we're looking at as we grow the organization of our urban centers, where the economic engine is going to be located, those emerging growth sectors in our economy. Where does the manufacturing work best? How does housing connect with that manufacturing? How do we support and position the fintech and the IT work that's emerging here? How does this comport then with the plans around the flood zones, the flood maps here, the water drainage systems, and all of those, and then the overlays for various neighborhoods that Tanya will talk about, the neighborhood master planning as well. So we're trying to create ways that visually you can see how all the pieces fit together, how to harmonize all of the elements here for that. And so the next, and so we'll always welcome your ideas of what are the overlays and if we can gather that information. This will then be the basis for the matrices of the hundreds of projects and initiatives that have been identified for that, and how they get localized in place, neighborhoods, communities, locations throughout the county. And so considerations then as for the branch members will be how do these align together, where there's coordination between various units of government or other sectors like the business sector, looking at the feasibility, and this will relate directly to the funding issue and other policy considerations. And then wanting to make sure that we're grouping like items together for that, and that they are leading to the resiliency goals that we're after. Finally, then last slide. So going back, the branch meetings themselves, and they are as well on a very rapid pace. During the workshops we're on an aggressive timeline. And I think we need to hold to that, if at all possible, to be able to complete this in a way that then has implications, for instance, of preparing the package for the state legislature in calendar year 2024. So Your notice on the August meetings are very important for public engagement as well as the communications here. And then in September, begin to do the finalize these recommendations to integrate into a comprehensive plan. And an important step here, as I mentioned earlier, are providing briefings for each of you with key staff that you would identify for us to do an individual deep dive to make sure that we are reflecting and representing your interests and your priorities, your realities that may not always come out in this collective meeting. So that gives you a little more detail about the road ahead. I think very consistent with Chair Ruane's call for the 90-day calendar to give us at this point, a July, August, September, so a quarter, which is going to be a very busy quarter before we move into the dissemination and approval process. Tanya, would you add anything on that or right to?
For the one thing for the task force member briefings, so we'll be reaching out to you all and your staff to schedule them probably after the next RTF meeting, early August, but we'll get it on the calendar just so that we are able to spend some time together and to walk through the initiatives. There are certain things that folks have communicated as, we hear what the branches are saying, it's just not going to work with our unique circumstances within our jurisdiction or within the space that we have. And what we're looking for from you all in those discussions is not necessarily no go, let's move on. It is let's look at the intent of what the initiative is trying to achieve. So what potential spin can be done in working with that initiative in order to achieve the goal that would work within your jurisdiction if what we have worked with the branches is not going to meet the mark within your individual jurisdiction within the different spheres that you work within. It may be more than one meeting if there are a number of initiatives that span different areas that you may want us to have a meeting with your public works folks and then also have your housing folks. And knowing everyone is very busy, it may not be the same meeting, so we can prioritize. But we'll be reaching out with you individually, like the initiatives that are, especially those that we can talk about all of them, but we're going to really want to focus on the ones that you're being identified, your jurisdiction is being identified as being one of the champions, being one of the partners that will help implement it. We want to be something that is feasible, that it is something that is desirable so that will actually be getting done. So we'll be reaching out and working to schedule those in the coming weeks.
I have a question. I know as we take this giant pile of projects and whittle them down and organize, I'm sure some would be disqualified for some reason or another. Are there any kind of mileposts there where we should be ratifying these through our respective boards?
So for the first part of your question, all the projects that you all submitted through the portal will be included within the plan. It may not be, if it's not fitting, if the project does not align with one of the priorities that you all agreed upon at the last RTF meeting, or it's one that the branches aren't able to work it into the initiatives that they've identified, it will be included in a separate appendix. These are additional projects that and what are potential funding streams. So they will all go through that funding stream mapping that we're currently going. We have a team of 7 currently working on that. There's quite a few projects. And then returning that to you all for your visibility, as there are some grant programs that are currently open, such as the EDA grant and the Protect grant, and saying these are, if this is a project that is a priority for your community, here are the grant programs that we would recommend applying for to make them a reality. So regardless if they're in the branch action plans, they will be included in the overall plan and mapped to a funding stream if it was one of the projects that you submitted. And I forgot the second half of your question.
It was about any kind of mile markers
okay.
or want to ratify. Going way back.
Yeah, we're going back. All right. So what I know a number of jurisdictions are doing, and we'll talk about neighborhood plans in just a little bit, is as we're going through, especially like Bonita Springs, Councilman Corey is providing a regular update, and a lot of this is being agreed upon as within the council as we're going along. Fort Myers, I believe, this afternoon is going to be talking about the neighborhood plans and discussing that piece in which specific neighborhoods, or fine tuning specifically what are the 8 blocks that we want to focus on for the neighborhood plan, since the recommendation we received was way more than 8 blocks. So as you're getting the initiatives, if you would like to have them presented to and talking to your council and having them be introduced to it, highly recommend that. We'll be looking for when the full plan is presented in October. We would highly recommend that they be presented, the full plan be presented to your council in the late October, early November timeframe.
All right, thank you.
There we go. So with neighborhood plans, this is part of the one of the steps towards implementation, but is going to be a separate document than the recovery and resilience plan in a separate timeline. You all, thank you so much for submitting recommendations and feedback on the list of neighborhoods that we presented at the last recovery task force in terms of an area that can really utilize that focus and of reimagining what can that community look like. So the neighborhood master plans, it's a deep dive look at, not hard fast rule, but 8 blocks-ish of a community and what can be done to reimagine it to aid in the recovery of this region. So I've been talking to all the communities that have been presented thus far. I've spoken with a number of you all to make sure it is a commitment in terms of making these plans a reality once we go through the planning process and sort of finalizing and defining what are those 8 blocks. We got recommendations of where it was a community and it's 92 square miles. And I'm like, let's bring it down a little bit. So just to give you an idea, I'm like, I love my team. I want them to sleep. Just giving you an example of what this looks like. My new hometown, Panama City, we did this for them back in 2019, the summer of 2019 is the process that we'll be looking to do with the communities that are the final neighborhoods that are identified to move forward with. Downtown Panama City was Panama City was losing in population. It was prior to Michael, and my fellow Panama City native over here with Chief DeLalo. Downtown was very sleepy, not a real social hub of the community. But it was the vision of the mayor and the city manager of bringing downtown and making that an economic driver for the area and to bring that kind of spirit back to the community after being hit by Cat 5. So it was not just a one funding stream solution. They identified that they wanted the strip of Main Street and Harrison Avenue to be focused on. That was their 8 blocks. A lot of street front shops were closed down before the hurricane, let alone after the hurricane. And they wanted this reimagining to occur to encourage new business to the area to bring that new life to it. So we did a aggressive community, and it's like the town halls, but a lot more specific, deep dive into that community. What do you want here in this neighborhood? We got some very specific feedback on what they were looking for, and the private sector was also listening. That the top 2 things that were communicated by the public was they wanted a space that can be a farmer's market, that it was there's no grocery, there's a Dollar General, but other than that, there's not really a grocery store anywhere near. Michael took out the one grocery store that was within a couple miles of that space. So it was becoming a food desert. So they wanted a farmer's market-like area and a farmer's market to come to the area. They also wanted more social opportunities, a brewery or something along those lines, more restaurants, so that it becomes a social and economic hub of the community. And there was very active participation from the private sector and investors, and hearing that. And so it was not just a government effort, it was a holistic community effort. Part of that was looking at, and kind of, this is what we're doing with your different jurisdictions, and identifying what is the neighborhood. Downtown was chosen because the marina property could be utilized as an incentive for the private sector to invest, which St. Joe, which is a local, a investment, or St. Joe does a lot. They offered to build a hotel and a restaurant. Restaurant opened last October, and the hotel opened up this month to bring that life to the end of the downtown area. We do have one of the top farmers markets now in Panama City, and actually, based off of that latest census data, Panama City is now the ninth fastest growing cities in the country, the metro area. It was not a one grant solution. And reimagining that downtown and bringing that plan to fruition. And this is part of it is going to be a joint effort to bring these plans to a reality, is that a hometown revitalization program grant was utilized, is being utilized to do the above ground amenities and facade improvements for businesses, and redoing the sidewalks and things along those lines. Infrastructure surtax was utilized for the underground infrastructure and currently being used. Panama City committed $1.5 million of their own funds with some of these grants, so that as to make them more competitive, that they are committing that funding towards the effort. They were able to secure a state appropriation to put in place a boardwalk to connect parts of the city, so that there is that increased foot traffic and opportunity for biking and recreational opportunities. And then the downtown CRA partnered with the small business development centers to provide training and mentorship to the small businesses that were impacted, that are currently their entrances are being blocked due to the construction. Reason why I'm kind of going over this is that it's not going to be a one grant solution. It is going to bring these plans to fruition, and what kind of neighborhoods to really focus on for these neighborhood plans. So some of you have put forward very specific neighborhoods. Times Square, for example, was put forward. And now we're working with the other jurisdictions to further define what a very large name community, what A blocks are being focused on. So we're working with a couple of you all to further define that. But we'll be starting this effort late August, and it'll be very much fine-tuned and focused on the specific neighborhoods that are identified, and making that a fruition. So on top of everything we've been talking about already, this will be a parallel effort that's underway and going forward.
One question is, I attended one of the branch meetings. It seemed that they were focusing on LMI areas, where if it wasn't LMI, they really weren't considering in the branch meetings. Was Panama City? It's an LMI area?
Panama City is an LMI area. It opens certain funding, but and speaking with the commissioner, that we're not going to be eliminating. We're just going to identify and try to fine tune what has been put forward, and then we're going to move forward with those neighborhoods.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, question regarding when you go on the recoverbaycounty.com and you've got the whole, it's showing 136 different projects. And I think it's really interesting because it's showing estimated cost, estimated funding, initiative, what initiative it's under. Have you gone through 4 years later, going on 5 years later, and done an analysis of what was successful, what wasn't successful? Grant opportunities, we can always learn to write a grant by seeing somebody else's grant. So are we going to be kind of cross-referencing on what was successful and what wasn't? Since that was part of the basis, I think, for the formulation of this plan.
So we're using best practices from both what Bay County did and what Panama City did. Bay County did not elect to go back and revisit the plan. However, Panama City did. And when 2 years later, we did go back and reevaluate it. So that was actually going to be on the agenda in future recovery task force meetings, is how do you want this to be tracked and discussed and going forward and reconciling what is and how are we doing the implementation plan? How is it going? And what are best practices? What edits need to be, pivots maybe need to be had?
And I don't know that this is exactly what you might be looking for, Councilwoman, but I'm trying to look at gross dollar amounts that were actually anticipated for actually the disaster or the estimate, and then obviously where appropriations came both from federal and state to give us an indication that Bay County has achieved. But what's difficult right now is just from the state legislature, their overall cost was about $7 billion. They received over $2 billion in state, but they're not done. So they're continuing to ask for money. The federal piece is what Chairman Carroll, who I've been working with, he's actually the chair of Bay County Commission. He's trying to come to a list on the federal side because that becomes more challenging. But I'd like to at least try to have that so we at least have a goal of they received X. That's what we should do. And 4 years later, having things, I mean, one of the best things that he had indicated is, if they were to do something over, they would have someone from the local delegation as a person on the task force, i.e., as my Jenna's here. Again, having the voice, having someone that's in the community to advocate for it. But I'm hoping to get at least a number, percentage that I think should be a goal for us overall. My favorite topic.
Yes.
SB.
So about 5 minutes before this meeting, and good job, Chase and Robbie, in printing this and getting this on our table. So I am also reviewing this information with you guys. So what we've been working with SBA is that we met with some staff that were locally positioned and had those initial conversations. And trying to get to the answers that have been posed with regards to the status of SBA loan disbursements and the status and the process and things along those lines. We eventually were able to have a meeting last week with a couple gentlemen that are the directors specifically over and responsible for the loan disbursements for Hurricane Ian. So they are the ones overseeing the staff that are the ones that call, that are processing the loans after they are submitted. We were able to have discussions in terms of what they're seeing and what what they view as the bottlenecks versus what is being seen at the local level. And Commissioner Wayne was able to speak to some of his own personal experiences in going through that process. It is still in the work in progress. They did provide this data as they would like to have the way we were chunking the information based off of the access that the county has in that data sharing agreement with SBA to collect information. And they provided us this additional data. There's still some discussions there's still some massaging with the information to try to get the full story of as I'm seeing on one column, it's like resolved, which means fully dispersed or canceled. Canceled means who canceled it? Is it because the person withdrew their application, or is it because their case was canceled without fully understanding why? So one offering that SBA did answer the question in terms of can you utilize local SBA affiliates to assist in this processing to provide that additional transparency. Essentially, the answer was no. That with how the legislation is written for SBA loans through the specific disaster program, it has to go through this SBA team that does it. They do not view it as a staffing issue on their end. That they have sufficient staff to be able to process the loans. That it is more a communicating what are the documentation needed, what is that information that they need to be able to process the loans and to be able to disperse the final funds. And we expressed the confusion of that we heard a lot in the town halls of folks that are saying that they have an approved application, where's my money? The gentleman that we spoke with very eloquently put forward, he's like, that's step one. There is multiple steps after and a lot of additional documentation that is needed in order for that disbursement to occur. And it does happen in waves. So we're continuing to work with his team to identify potentially having events that the Recovery Task Force is sponsors, advertises that, but then potentially SBA would send that team or at least have them available through a computer or a phone and have them ready on standby to answer phone calls and be able to do that case by case case management of what exactly is going on with your loan application. And we are working out the logistics of that piece of, will their staffing be able to, we don't want to have an event, several hundred people show up and we have 5 phones. So working out those logistics and making sure that we have the staffing that is able to meet the demand that we're hearing and trying to validate through the numbers based off of what they're seeing versus what is being seen locally.
I mean, the frustration with SBA, A, trying to give them bandwidth, B, some people that's more familiar with the file, they don't seem to have accumulation of notes on a particular file when they interact with you. So it gets transferred within the group. And again, I kept my own SBA. So SBA is actually for individuals as well as for businesses. I kept mine open and we would have a series of questions, insurances, you name it. But the file actually got closed by SBA because their reasoning was I didn't submit the information in a timely manner. That wasn't necessarily accurate at all. It's just that multiple people touched the file. Unfortunately, having come from that world, in the financial world, every time a file is touched in our organization, there's notes, there's documentation, you know exactly what's outstanding, what's missing. They closed those files. We're trying to encourage people, if you have received a letter where your file is closed, due to nothing you've done to close the file, let's get it back open. So their numbers are somewhat very misleading, the way it goes through. Obviously, David, you could appreciate the touches on a file, the various requirements that an approval has, the things that are satisfied. And again, what is most frustrating is there's many people that touch files and don't necessarily know who did the last ask. You've submitted it. They can't find it. And most things that you submit are done by fax, which is bizarre.
So hieroglyphics are no longer being used.
That'll be the next version. Yeah. To their not helping on our particular situation, in a separate conversation that Terry and I had with the directors from SBA, they have learned a lot of lessons on Lee County, and they are implementing a new methodology and strategy and a new website for the next round of disasters. So we were like, that's good job, but we need to focus on the folks for Lee County. So there have been a lot of lessons learned. There is of trying to implement them, but still looking for how to resolve the cases that are still open or were canceled and there still be maybe a need based off of the individual experiences that is being communicated quite extensively.
I'll have more at a future date on that.
Yes. All right, permitting dashboard. So we did an iteration of the permitting dashboard and worked with the jurisdictions. And when we received the data, it just really it wasn't telling the full story. So we worked very closely with a couple jurisdictions, and just want to give a big thank you to Mickey and Sean and Christy within the county, and trying to refocus the columns of data that we're looking to collect, the information regarding the permitting to better understand the different process flows and things along those lines. We have reached out to each of the municipalities to try to collect this information with regards to permitting and what is the some of the experiences that they're having. What we heard from some of the jurisdictions that we spoke to thus far is that there's just simply, despite hiring contracted support, there's just not enough people that have these experiences, that have this experience, that have this expertise to be able to process the permits quickly, do the inspections and things along those lines. That they have hired contracting support, but even them, those folks have a capacity situation. So one of the desired potential initiatives for the branches to look at, and has been discussed as well, is sharing of best practices of how have some jurisdictions found ways to be more efficient, where it may not be best to do first in, first out. That it is, if Bob is going out to do an inspection in an area, to knock out 7 inspections, while it may not be the first in, first out, it's more efficient to be able to process permits, and how that can be tracked and make assignments and things along those lines was one example of many that were provided. So we're continuing to collect the data from the jurisdictions, and we'll work with y'all's staff to have that information in a dashboard for you guys, for you all as quickly as possible. And then also looking to, as part of those conversations, see what best practices can be shared for everybody, since there is a manpower shortage due to the demand in general for permitting support. Any questions?
We were talking about this actually at our management and planning meeting yesterday. And what I hear from staff is that software is a big issue, because some software, it isn't easy to pull these metrics out. And that takes time from people. And then there's other software there's better pull the metrics out, but then as they're more powerful, they're also more complicated and more difficult to maintain and take greater resources. So it'd be interesting in your collaboration with the different municipalities to mention, or at least to talk about what tools they're using and which tools are more effective.
Excellent.
Is there anything that we can do? I know a couple months ago I provided you. Is there like a Excel sheet that you'd like to work through? Or if you've spoken to our staff, can you let the task force member know from the municipality in case there's some follow-up that we need to do if there was something extra? Because I don't know if you've talked to my city of Sanibel or not.
We got everything from you.
Pardon me?
We got everything from your staff.
Yeah, but just how we can help each other
Yeah,
to make
excellent.
sure we're getting the right, accurate information, and also the way that you're looking to compile it. So
in
let
our
us know.
next conversations, we'll make sure to CC you all in our conversations with them and collecting any additional data that we'll be looking for. And then for some of the best practices, that will be most likely included in one of the initiatives for the branch action plan, since permitting is a significant focus. But anything that is documented, we'll definitely share. Any questions?
All right. You're going to get a ton of information, beginning with the workshop, the BOCC workshop information coming up soon. We have the branch meetings going forward, and we'll coordinate scheduling the briefings with your calendar. Other than that, I think we now need to move to our period of public comment as we close out next month.
One more thing, Terry. We did get a slide deck for, I was in this meeting for Tuesday's meeting. It's not going to be the big book that I've indicated, but it's certainly an indication. It just came live, the slide deck that's going to be available. I'll make sure it's disseminated out to you all. All right. Just wanted to thank you.
Yeah, and it is our next meeting is July 28th. That flashed by fast for that. But we'll add additional dates to be held just for your calendars, and then go with that. Let me shift over to now a period for public comment.
Lady in the pink back there.
Good morning. My name's Ellen.
Ellie, we need the mic for you.
I'm Ellie McEwen with the City of Bonita Springs. I have 2 questions, actually. The first one is the presentation. There were some great information for the initiatives and the technical briefs. will that be made available to the public so that we can digest the focus of what you're trying to do?
Yes.
And then the second question is, some folks from the community have indicated that they're interested in submitting individual projects that you're searching for, but there's not a mechanism to get into the portal. So is there someone that we can refer them to in order to get the portal access?
Any other public comments?
I think Deputy Mayor Forbes.
Yeah, I wanted to bring up a couple things that happened at I think it was the Natural Resources Committee meeting. There was a couple misstatements that was from other branch meetings. I don't think it came from here. One was that Burt wasn't being looked upon favorably because everybody knows we're going to be going to mass transportation and we have to keep that railroad right away for the railroads. And so I raised my hand and I said, look, if we get the right of way, part of the condition of the sale will be that we have to preserve space for 2 tracks, which is roughly 30 feet. And then there was another statement that was made that was, we're not going to be advocating widening roads and all that because we're going to mass transportation. And even if that's true, I made the statement that, that's going to take 20 years just to get it here, let alone get the money to do it. So the other thing, which is more important to me, I received the minutes of the meeting, and it was like only kind of like what the moderator was talking about the process, and things like those miscomments that were made in the corrections were not in the meeting minutes. So I sent a correction in to Haggerty to the effect and gave him some examples. But I think it's important that the minutes on any major ideas that come up, there ought to be a place to add that into the minutes. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Marcia Ellis, thank you for the opportunity to give public comment today. I too have had a little bit of a question about where the public comments after the branch meetings or after meetings like this are living. I haven't really followed up with that, but that is kind of an outstanding question. And then second of all, I've been asking myself as I've been listening, and I've been to quite a few of these, is, what is the intent? Because I think it's important that we remind ourselves that it's not to throw necessarily accelerant on an economic boom, but to meet unmet need and to assess and address environmental and ecological risk that is impacting our resiliency. Because we are here today because we experienced a natural disaster. And I think that keeping that central is important. I've been concerned about the land code, and not just issues that have been brought up as controversial, but I've requested to have versioning so I can see what has happened and what has changed in the land code over time, which is a service we can subscribe to through Municode. And I also asked that versioning, edits, additions, and comments on projects being brought forth and considered also reflect that versioning so that we can best document and provide transparency to the community. I myself have been extremely concerned about the impacts of out-of-control growth on our water resources, our public health, as we face another algae crisis, diminishing water supplies, and flooding so that we can build our capacities. Thank you for the opportunity to bring these issues forward.
Any other public comments? I'll call for the meeting adjourned. Thank you.